Okay, so I think it's probably good for us to go ahead and get started here. So first, let me start out by giving a welcome to everyone who's taken time out of what I'm sure is a busy day to come and spend the next 85 or 90 minutes with us talking about some really important issues. I'm John Villasenor. I'm a professor here at UCLA, and I'm the director of the Digital Technologies Initiative at the Luskin Center here at UCLA. This is a new initiative that we've launched recently to address and propose solutions for a lot of the public policy challenges that we're all aware are raised by all of the changes really in terms of digital technologies and how we obtain and search and access information. And so today's panel is the first of a series of midday panels that we're having over the remaining months of this year as well as into 2014. Today's panel, of course, is on the future of music delivery. We've got a panel at the beginning of November on the move from ownership of content to licensing. As you probably know, when you get a song on iTunes or a book on Amazon Kindle, you're actually not, when you quote buy that, you're not actually getting ownership of the copy. You're getting really a license to the copy. In early December, we've got a panel on digital media in the age of the cloud. Early January, we've got one on crowdsourcing, paywalls, and the future of news. And then later on in the year, we'll be having panels on topics such as basically smart cities, improving digital literacy for everybody, and preventing the misuse of digital technologies for exploitation and other topics as well. So let me now move to the topic of today's panel. We're fortunate to have on the stage and certainly in the room as well some of quite literally the world's experts, the best experts in music law and music policy. But for the benefit of some of the folks in the room who may be newer to this area, I'll briefly mention just by example some of the issues that are being faced here. As some of you may or may not know, most songs actually have two different copyrights. One is for the underlying musical composition, and the other is for the sound recording. For example, whether or not the holder of the sound recording copyright gets paid depends in part on how a song is delivered or broadcast. So to give you an example, if you're in your car and you're listening to FM radio to a song, the holder of that sound recording copyright doesn't get paid anything. And now if that same song is delivered to you via Sirius XM satellite radio, then that sound recording copyright holder will get paid some amount. And if you listen to the same song through a non-interactive internet broadcasting service such as Pandora, that copyright holder will get paid a completely different amount. And so one of these very specific policy questions that has come up and been reflected in legislation, which has been proposed but not adopted, is whether that framework should be made more uniform. And of course, there's very strong differing views on A, whether it should be made more uniform, and B, if it is more uniform, what should be the common denominator under all of these. So that's one example of a very specific current policy issue that impacts this business. So let me now just close by again thanking you for being here and introducing our moderator, who is sitting immediately to my left, and then she's going to go ahead and introduce the panelists and talk a little bit more about the panel. So Alex Pham is currently with Billboard magazine, which, as most of you probably know, is really a premier publication in this area. She's been in the business of journalism, and in fact a business journalist for over 20 years. And she covered technology and entertainment for the Los Angeles Times prior to joining Billboard. And prior to that, she was at newspapers including the Boston Globe, USA Today, and the Washington Post. She's graduated from Johns Hopkins University. And since we are doing this under the auspices of the UCLA School of Public Affairs, I would be remiss not to note that she is also the holder of a master's degree in public policy from the University of Texas at Austin. And in 2009, she was named the Entertainment Journalist of the Year by the Los Angeles Press Club. So I will turn it over to Alex, and thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. We have some of the most renowned experts in the complexities of music. So if anybody can make music understandable, it's these four people. So I would listen very carefully. The first person to my left is David Oxenford. He's been making music rights understandable for us for years as the principal writer of the Broadcast Law blog. He's also partnered with Wilkinson Barker Nauer, who represents broadcast and digital media companies. Next over is Jeff Price. I don't know if anybody knows about TuneCore, but he created TuneCore many years ago, and it allows anybody to sell their song on iTunes. Anyone. You could take your grandfather's recording. I think you had taken your grandfather's recording from many, many years ago, upload it, and sell it on iTunes for 99 cents, right alongside Metallica and anybody else. And now he's reinventing the music industry on YouTube with a company called Audium, which helps artists monetize their rights on YouTube. Next to him is Steve Rennie. He is the manager of Incubus and a former record label executive. He's been in the music industry for over 3 decades, knows everything about it. And I was just about to say that the highlight of my career is to be able to say that I have the manager of Incubus on my panel, the person who manages the spawn of the devil. This is the highlight of my career. And then,
wait, that hurts.
Oh,
Doesn't hurt. Yeah,
no. You can be the spawn of the devil if you want.
The shadow of the rock star again. Yeah.
And then, last but not least, we have Chris Harrison, who is Assistant General Counsel for Pandora. I didn't know this, but Chris also travels once a week to Austin, Texas, my alma mater, to teach a law class there. So we have a lot to learn from Chris. And with that, I'll let the panel begin with a question, sort of a futuristic question, blue skying it. How will we consume, listen, enjoy music 5 years from now? How do you think it'll be different from what we're doing today?
So you want me to start?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting question. I come from a broadcast background. I've represented radio broadcasters on FCC and transactional matters for a long time in Washington, D.C. And then as the broadcast industry changed, ended up working with digital media companies on royalty issues, especially as a lot of broadcasters started to evolve in that area. So when I look at the music industry, I look at it from a broadcast perspective, looking at the radio broadcasters and how they've always played a huge role in introducing new music to the public and otherwise making it available to listen wherever you are, whenever you want to listen on some portable device, mobile device. And suddenly, from the perspective of a lot of my clients, they're not the only ones. That guys like Chris's company and others are suddenly competing for what had traditionally been the broadcaster space, the space on the mobile device. I mean, how many people, do they even make transistor radios anymore, much less clock radios? Have you ever gone to Best Buy to try to find a clock radio to wake up to anymore? It's very difficult. They're all for iPhone docks or whatever. Broadcasters still play a huge role and have somewhere around 95% circulation on a weekly basis. People, over 95% of the population, still listens to radio. But that scares the broadcast industry because one of the principal places, if not the principal place, is in the car. Especially in a city like Los Angeles. As you're driving around, the easiest thing to do is not necessarily fiddle around with your phone or your mobile device to find your channel on Pandora, but just to press the knob and there you are, you got some radio station, a couple of presets, and it's still easy. But as more and more smart cars are developed with dashboards where radio becomes just one more icon on a screen, along with Pandora, along with iTunes Radio, along with Spotify, along with 8 zillion other services that offer music from millions of other sources, it becomes very scary to the traditional guys who have made music available. So I see it moving in that direction. I see more and more on-demand services, but there's still a role for traditional type broadcasting. Just how it's delivered will be a question for the future.
Yeah, with all this talk about new methods of delivery for music, it's easy to overlook the fact that radio is still king. A lot of discovery still happens in broadcast radio, but as David pointed out, that edge is going to be dwindled away as our cars become connected and essentially giant cell phone on wheels that allow you to access any form of entertainment, any form of digital media at your fingertips, built into the dashboard. Anybody else have a vision of the future?
I mean, it's going to be ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere. It's like that commercial from years ago. Every movie ever made will be available for you to watch in this dusty little hotel room 24/7 and on demand. So every song ever made will be available for you to listen to at any time, anywhere. And what you're experiencing right now is the competition for adoption of operating systems and hardware devices. It's Apple versus Spotify versus Microsoft versus Amazon versus, to some degree, Pandora. They're all fighting to get to the places that you go, so when you're there, you can click a button and have access to music. And what's concerning to me is in that conversation, music is being used in a new way. It used to be traditionally retailers, distributors, artists, managers, record labels were all incentivized to make money by selling the music. You made your money when the music sold, and primarily pre-recorded music, right, on a format. Now what we're finding is the new entities are able to use music, actually lose money on it, and still generate significant amounts of revenue, either through operations, system adoption, hardware sales, or IPOs worth billions of dollars, despite losing millions of dollars on the use and consumption of music. So as an artist representative, that really concerns me because I feel the artist might get lost in this equation. We might end up accidentally destroying culture.
It devalues your word that it devalues the value of music.
Well,
so if you're giving it away for free,
I mean, I have a rather radical notion, which I feel the conversation isn't the right one. We shouldn't be discussing whether or not there should be compulsory licensing because we're worried about stifling innovation. The conversation should be about what's best for the artist, not best for the companies that exploit them.
Steve?
Yeah, I think it does. I'll take that. But there was an old Journey song back in the day called "Any Way You Want It." Right? And I was working at Sony back in the day, and I came up with this proposal about how I thought Sony, more than any company, should be in the business of trying to figure out how they want it and give it to them, because anything else was going to be a fight. It was going to be swimming against the tsunami. And I think that is actually starting to play out. So all these things that you see out here are just ways for people to listen to music. My kids, go in the car and they'll plug in a laptop and listen to music on YouTube. I find myself spending more time on Spotify, Pandora, places that I initially fought because of the uncertainty. And I now, as a consumer, I quite enjoy the fact that I can type in the name of a song, almost anything, and hear it right there on the spot versus calling up, in the old days, calling up somebody at the label and having them send me the CD and all of those things. So I think the difficult part from a manager's perspective, from who's an artist representative, is you want your music to be heard. The biggest challenge once you've made your music is to actually get it heard. So, I haven't spent as much time with a smart group of people like this debating public policies as I have trying to make sure that the music's heard. But the big takeaway for me is that people will consume music on their own terms if you let them, and I'm interested to see that play out all the way, and I'm also interested to see that the artist gets a fair shake in all of that. But the truth is, for years, the artists have not gotten a fair shake, and that was happening long before the internet was part of the equation. That's probably a whole separate policy issue.
So Chris, almost 73 million people now listen to Pandora actively every month. That's
17 million one.
Yeah, that's a significant portion of the population. So 5 years from now, how many will it be, and how will they listen to music?
Well, I think fundamentally, there's always been two ways that people listen to music, right? You either lean in or you lean back. Before it was terrestrial radio, if you wanted to lean back and you like classic rock, so you find a classic rock station in your town, you tune in, and sometimes they'd be nice and tell you that they were going to play the Dark Side of the Moon at 11 o'clock on Friday, and so you could lean in if you liked Pink Floyd, wanted to hear that. And if you did, you go to the record store, hopefully, and buy your own copy of Pink Floyd and lean in and listen to that whenever you wanted. So I don't see there being sort of a sea change in terms of sort of the activity of listening to music. People will either have a song that they want to hear and figure out how to hear it, or they'll use music more passively, in which case they'll find whether it's terrestrial radio or Pandora or a playlist they've put together on their own, a mixtape. I can actually say that I've made those. To me, the activity of listening to music is going to be the same. We'll just have different means by which we actually consume it. You know, I think there's always been sort of iterative innovation in the what's traditionally been called the broadcast media, but radio in general. And Pandora is just another step down that road. And I think based on the trajectory where we are now, we'll have more than 73 million people listening to it in 5 years.
I think one of the really interesting things to note, though, and this impacts public policy and legislation and law, is speaking to a Columbia law professor at Columbia University who's an expert on the Constitution, discussing copyright law and how it's codified in the Constitution, et cetera, which you know far more than I do. But what was interesting is we value music so much as a society that we want to make sure that multinational corporations or companies in general can't contain it and control it. And that's why you have an expiration to something like the copyright law. What I find fascinating and very interesting and relevant, at least to this conversation, is traditionally we had one entity. Let's go, well, it used to be a lot more, but let's go to Sony. Sony has how many recordings of songs under one giant umbrella? Tens of millions? Hundreds of millions of songs under one entity. But the new music industry isn't that anymore. The new music industry is each one of you are creating your own song, and each one of you are not under a Sony umbrella. And the laws and the conversations we're having are around this concept that culture is still aggregated under these giant monolith multinational corporations who have to be controlled. And these conversations are working to the detriment of the individual while empowering corporations. Because this isn't what the music industry is anymore. Each month at TuneCore, we had 15 to 20,000 newly recorded releases being distributed around the world. And these releases and recordings were being done by the everyman. They weren't being put out by Sony. And this constituency, when I was there, sold over 1 billion units of music and generated over $500 million in revenue. It was the size of EMI, the everybody else. So what concerns me in policy is laws being enacted thinking that we're all part of Sony or Warner Music Group when we're not, when we're John Caterin and the John Cate Band sitting in the back of the room, or we're Incubus, who is no longer signed to a label. These are individual people who should not have, in my opinion, compulsory laws and statutory licenses shoved down their throat to protect society, because they are part of society and it works to their detriment.
Well, but let me point out from a transactional cost perspective, if I have to go license Incubus individually and every one of the 15,000 artists who put their music up on TuneCore, unless that music is really, really good, and thankfully for you, the music you represent is,
So far,
I'm not sure how much time I'm going to bother spending trying to investigate those 15,000 artists, given the enormous transaction costs. One of the benefits of a compulsory license is songs don't compete on price. And so the Incubus song and the song from an unknown artist who recorded something in their basement is essentially given the same quote value, unquote. And where Incubus makes more money is because at least in theory, they're better musicians, they put out a better product, they get listened to more. And so that same royalty gets multiplied by a much larger number, so they make more money. But at the beginning, when we don't know whether Incubus is better than the garage band in the back of the room, we don't penalize one band or favor another band by creating an economic incentive.
Sorry, Alex. What a spin of incorrect statements. You want to force, first of all, you want to pay Congress, and you're doing that to the congressman who's not here, to push through lobbying to force a compulsory license with a statutory rate, to force every citizen of the United States to have a metaphorical gun at their head, to have to give you their assets so you can make money off of it, whether you stream it or not. Why can't they have the right to say no? Right? And they should have the right to say no. And then you'll be forced to have to create something of true value and innovation like Spotify did, like iTunes did. No. Is it easy? No. But if you don't like it, go create your own music. Oh, Hotel California is hard to create? That's right. Music has value. So stop lobbying Congress to force artists to make less so it can make your life easier so you can get a higher market cap and make billions of more dollars off of their backs.
But again, Jeff, part of the,
Sorry, Alex.
So now you see
this
why I
is good.
sat between you.
I'm happy to take that spot because Jeff's point is really nonsensical.
That's right. It's ridiculous that artists should be able to say no to Pandora.
No, that's not the point.
That is
You
the
brought up-
point.
You brought up the Constitution. The reason that copyright is a monopoly, everyone knows that monopolies are bad. The reason we tolerate the monopoly of copyright is because we want to reward creators to disseminate their works to the public. The copyright is in existence as an incentive for the dissemination of creative works for the public good. It's not to make record labels wealthy enough that their executives can fly around on private jets.
Or Pandora.
It's not to create, frankly, wealth so that an Incubus can fly around on private jets. It's so that music gets disseminated to the widest possible audience for the public good. I'm not disagreeing that there may be situations where an artist would like the ability to say no, but if what you want to create is a system where content users have to negotiate individually with people who create content, you are asking for there to be competition. And in competition, I'm from Northern California. I live in Northern California now. People assume that I'm a tree-hugging communist. I'm actually from Texas. And in Texas, we play something called football. And in football, there are winners and there are losers. And I'm telling you that the 14,000 people who created music and put it up on TuneCore, if a music service had to go license all 15,000 of them individually, none of them would.
Unless you're
Spotify. And they would never get played, and they would never find an audience, and they would never be heard, and they would never make any money.
That's
David
just
has a point.
Wrong.
That's
I'll
what
jump in
David's.
there as a manager, right, having
Okay.
heard both sides. Um,
So does Steve.
The truth of the matter is, right, that when the record business, because there's a record business, you know, and there's some things that are not great about it and other things that are okay. But there was 5,000 records back in the old days that got released, and everybody fought for their shelf space to get on the radio and all of that. And out of those 5,000, I hate to put it in terms of winners and losers, but there were some that managed to gain greater acceptance and were more successful. People wanted to see them. So I suppose that process plays out everywhere. There's lawyers that are better than others. There's football teams that used to not be so good. They're doing better. It's just that's the nature of the beast here, you know. I'll say from a manager's perspective now, having had a band on a major label, where to Sony's, to be fair about it, they added a lot to the equation, and they bought the rights, you know, for X amount of money. And it wasn't a very good deal, but if you stayed in the game long enough, you had a way to sort that out. You know, now that they're independent, right, I'll say from a manager's perspective that it would be better for us if we could have a conversation with Spotify, with Pandora, with whoever it might be on an individual basis and get the best deal we could, because there was no other place in my career where we weren't able to go out and kind of play the field if it was. You know, you could choose the promoter you wanted to play with. You had competing offers in a market to play your dates. You know, you had competing offers for merchandising, competing offers for publishing, right? And so those are things that I would love to be in a position, because today, as a manager in the business, been doing this for 35 years, you could put the top 100 managers in the business, if there were 100, and ask them how to explain to your artists what you would get paid if you were on Pandora, if you were on Spotify. So I get 1 million plays. I'm sitting with the singer. How much does he make? Because they're not interested in public policy. They do their thing, and they want to know if they're getting paid. So I always have this little piece of paper, and that's perfect deal for an artist is one that you could put right here. But I just know, no disrespect intended, that it would be a long conversation about, well, there's this and there's that, and we got to think about this, that kind of makes you feel like everybody's hiding the scorecard. That was clearly the case in the record business, where you got paid your royalty of $2, and then the next 22 pages took it all away from you. Oh, did I mention you got to pay for the record? Oh, did I mention you got to pay for the book? Did I mention you got to pay for the publicist? And so, God, we sold a million records. We made 10, but God, go get them on the next one. That felt like a lie. And so it's somewhere between these two.
But that is one of the beauties of a compulsory license. You've got
There's some
those
sense of
rates
order about it.
that are there, that are open to everybody, and that you don't have separately negotiated deals with 8 million companies. It's just like there's the music industry has changed, so has the distribution of music changed. In the past, there were lots of complaints from musicians that the distribution of music was centered in 4 or 5 big radio companies, and you had to go get some independent promoter
You still do.
to get that on the radio. Now, though, anybody in their garage could theoretically come up with the next engine for music distribution, whether it be Pandora or the next Pandora killer that's down the road or whatever it is. The big problem is whenever they step outside that defined universe of a compulsory license, then they have to hire lots of guys like me to figure out how to negotiate
See, I don't
with
agree.
each and
I see it.
every
Jeff, it's
artist
market
to clear that up.
See, it's market opportunity. I mean, that's what I did with TuneCore. TuneCore was a voluntary opt-in organization where artists could opt in at their discretion to pick and choose where they wanted their recordings and compositions to be exploited. If I could do it in a couple of years with a couple $1 million, certainly a company worth billions of dollars could spend their money on that sort of innovation as well. It's an opt-in, like ASCAP and BMI are and CSAC, okay? These are organizations that represent the lyrics and melody of a song. It's a voluntary opt-in organization that helps for clearances of copyrights. So why can't there be one for entities like a Pandora? Why can't an artist choose to say no if they want to? It's not a radical concept. I'm sorry it's difficult for you, but it's not my effing problem, right? You chose to be in this business. You could have gone and sold T-shirts or drilled for oil, but you chose to exploit other people's works to make money. And you're going to do it by putting ads around it. You're a delivery vehicle, and that's fine. But compensate them in a way that they believe is fair, and don't have the government march into their home, put a gun at their head, and say, tough, whether you like it or not, you're giving him your stuff so he can make his market cap worth more in the stock market. And you know what? You don't even get to negotiate the rate. You can't say a damn thing because all of us bigwigs sitting up here in Capitol Hill are going to do it. You got to get to sit at the card table at Thanksgiving with the other kids while the big boys figure it out. And by the way, they're legislating to try to drive the rate down because they don't like the fact that AM, FM radio don't have to pay for it. And it's ridiculous.
Well, one of
And
the challenges of public policy, though, is being able to come up with regulations that are flexible enough to accommodate future technologies that we don't anticipate yet, that we don't even know about yet. We don't know the usage cases. How do our 3-year-olds going to want to consume music 10, 20 years from now? How do we create policy that accommodates the flexibility and the constantly morphing
I'll
nature
tell you
of
how the big
technology?
labels used to do. They'd have these all-in clauses. Anything we know of and anything we haven't thought of is going to get you a rate. And I say that because it started to play out in the record business when you had royalty rates and so forth and so on, but on outside income, it was a 50-50 split, or it was a much worse. If you were licensing stuff, it was 50-50. But if it was in the royalty zone, it was a much lower thing. So the record labels had a lot of room to talk about what category that went into. And so when these money started coming through from online stuff, the managers were arguing that that's a 50-50 split. The labels were arguing, no, that's under your regular royalty rate, which is, of course, subject to all these deductions. And I think that the public policy conversation, winds up lagging behind how fast things are moving today. So you get this horrible place where everybody's
So how do we
uncomfortable.
keep up?
Well, although we're having almost 2 public policy discussions here, because we're having a public policy or 2 discussions of even the business aspects. We're having a discussion where the musicians are saying that they're not getting enough. But you look at the services, and basically the past and probably the near future will be littered with bodies of digital music services that have not been able to make money.
Like
And
artists.
Well, except the artists are at least getting paid. They're getting paid from the digital music services that are there under a compulsory license or under?
I would argue that most artists have lost significant amounts of money developing their craft, investing, learning how to play, going to Berklee School of Music, going on the road, touring, recording.
And how is that any different though in the digital world than it was 20 years ago?
It's not
There are
so-
lots of musicians who lost their
Exactly.
their
And that's my
their
point, though.
investments 20 or 30
why
years
do,
ago.
why do we then give the new music companies the higher benefit than the artist? Right? Why do we say, well, wait, their innovation's being stifled. Look how hard it is. Look how hard it is to be a
And if
musician.
For somebody to pay the artist, there's got to be somebody who's
But
making money
I
to pay
did
the artist.
it. I did it in 2 years with a couple $1 million, and we paid back over $500 million to people. It wasn't that difficult. You just have to have the want and the need and the drive. It allows for innovation in the market to create these clearinghouses for rights licensing and administration. It's not that hard. You just need to want to do it.
Right, but again, we're having different discussions. You distributed money to the artists that came from someplace.
But
It came from the service.
I got a rights grant to copyright to exploit it. Right? And
Right.
that's all the music industry is. And once it was exploited, I administered the money back.
Right, but
Same thing.
in order for there to be somebody to pay for the exploitation of the music, those somebodies have to have a business incentive to get into the business, to pay you to distribute that
Well, then
money.
why aren't you arguing for a compulsory license for iTunes? Why don't filmmakers have to license their stuff to Netflix? What if I read a book to a song? Does Pandora get to stream that and it gets done at a particular rate set by public policy? I just don't agree that the artists will ultimately suffer because people have to license from them or they opt in for organizations like an ASCAP and BMI to license on their behalf.
Perhaps the one thing that we all can agree on is that the inequity in licensing so far with regards to cable, XM radio, satellite radio, and internet radio is probably not a good idea. Is that correct? Like what John said earlier, if Incubus's song is played on XM radio, they get a certain amount of money. If it's played on Pandora, they get a different amount of money. If it's played on broadcast radio, it gets a much, much smaller amount of money. So should that matter? Should we equalize all that? If there is a law that says you have to license and this is the rate, should the rate be the same?
I think the
Chris?
reason it's highlighted now from an artist perspective is because the record selling piece of the equation has been mortally wounded. Right? You used to be able to sell a lot more records, and so that original model that I grew up with, you got on the radio, it was free for the radio stations, and nobody cared
There was
because
promotional
because
value,
it
it's
led
all
to
records.
it led to money on the backside of it. I think now that money's disappearing is why the conversation is becoming so heated, and why when I sit with folks like this, I still couldn't tell my artists how much you do get paid if you got to play on this service, or this service, so that I could pull out my Excel spreadsheet and go, okay, man, we got 1 billion plays, right? And that's going to equal what? You see, that's not clear. So if it turns out
About $40 million.
that all
So
these
streaming services, it's 1 billion times 14 or 12 hundredths of a penny for us. I mean, I understand with Spotify because it's not a compulsory license.
you get 1 billion, here's the arithmetic.
Well, if you want to do a direct deal with me, I'll be happy to send you the check directly and you can distribute it to your artist.
Okay.
The compulsory license provides a couple of benefits. It's completely transparent, and it insists that one of your biggest problems, that record labels can't get their grubbies on unrecouped royalties.
Mhm.
That doesn't exist in a direct deal. So if Spotify wants to pay the record labels, and then the record labels recoup unrecouped advances, and then pay the artist, I can understand why artists are confused by how much they're getting paid by Spotify, but there's no confusion. I can tell you exactly how many times Pandora has paid an Incubus song. The statutory license that we pay is in the Federal Register. You can look it up. You take that number times 45%. And if that's not what's flowing into your bank account, then you ought to call up Sound Exchange, because we pay on a per song basis for every song that comes out of our server at the statutory rate.
What about the composition? Since you're going transparent here in front of all these people, what's your deal with ASCAP and BMI? Because that's the other side of the equation. Let's have that transparency. Let's do it. Put it out there for us.
I believe we've stated in our public filings that we pay slightly less than 4% of our revenue to ASCAP and BMI.
So how much? How much is it per stream?
Well, if you take our revenue times 4% times our streams, that's the number.
Sure, so tell us what it is. It's right, it's hard. I'm with Steve on that one. So we're having a conversation where there is a NDA in place between ASCAP BMI, who, by the way, if any of you are songwriters call, they won't tell you what the negotiated rate is because they say it violates the confidentiality clause. If what he's saying is true, which would be great, we've just violated the confidentiality clause of ASCAP and BMI. And we can't also tell you the penny rate, but basically we heard part of the royalty, and I'm all for direct licensing. And I love, by the way, for the record, I love what Pandora is doing. It's making music ubiquitous. So let's give it a prop. It's getting everywhere, and I love the fact that it's getting everywhere. And I was really into it until some recent changes in trying to influence public policy. I'd rather see that go into innovation. For example,
with innovation, though, I think a lot of the
this is
venture capitalists I talk to, including the one that invested in Pandora, Larry Marcus, says that music is kind of a toxic area for them. They don't want to invest in music startups because there's no transparency. The licensing process is too complex, and that means there's just too much risk. So Larry has recently said, why don't we have compulsory licensing for on-demand streaming as well as internet radio?
Which is what you just asked about with iTunes.
sure, no, well, it was more of a rhetorical question for me.
Right, but she just answered that.
Well, no,
Do you think that
she
would help?
answered from the perspective of a venture capitalist whose sole purpose is to get a return on investment as quickly as possible at all expense.
But
Isn't that what a
isn't-
musician's doing?
Yeah,
A musician, I think, would argue is creating art because they're compelled to do so, and I think most musicians would continue to do that even if they've made no money, which most
So why
do.
do we pay them at all?
You're right. Well, you know what? For the most part, you're not, and you're driving that rate down. So that's a good point. You live by your
We paid
words.
more than $300 million in royalties last year.
Then why are you legislating Congress to drive the rate down as opposed to putting your money
I
into
don't know what
innovation?
bill. I don't know what bill you're referring to. There's no bill in
Or we-
Congress that does it.
Oh, that's because it's being pushed by the Republican representative
Time out,
Vantage
time out,
Choice for
time out.
Artists.
But they have to stay in business. But
Steve, I really want your opinion on
Why?
whether or not
Why do
we
we
should-
have to be here to help him? That's not what artists are here to do. Artists were not put on this planet so
But Steve
Pandora could be
represents
worth
the
billions.
artist, so let's
I'll
hear what
say
Steve
this.
has to say
I'll
about it.
say this, I actually believe that most artists do what they do because they are compelled to do it in some way. That they do it because they love it. And that most of them, at some level, have accepted the fact that they might not make money at it, right? But that's not to say that once you do it, that there's not value in it, right? And I try to spend my time trying to help them take that music and turn it into a career. This conversation we have, from my perspective, is very narrowly focused because the music business that I'm in is not just the selling of recorded music. It's not just the streaming part of it. It's the whole of it. It's licensing your music. It's T-shirts. It's concerts. It's endorsements and all the things that can come with having your music being widely heard. But when we talk about innovation, and this is where I'll side up with Jeff here, is that from an artist perspective, now I'm a major, now independent, I would love to sit there and have a page, if I get a deal with Pandora or with Spotify or somewhere, where I could dial in, here's Incubus, here's exactly how many plays you've had, and where those plays are happening, and what songs they're playing, right? And I would even feel better about some kind of compulsory license, assuming that it was reasonably fair, because I'm not looking to have to go out to every single person on the planet. There's only so many hours a day, because my whole work isn't just what's happening on the streaming. But those are things that companies like Pandora, people that have access to that information, that don't make it readily available, in the music business context, I will always read that is not a good sign. Because if it was easy to get that information, as you said,
So I'm going to give you my
perfect. Okay.
nice segue.
Okay, perfect.
I'm glad we accomplished something today.
Pandora announced at South by Southwest last year a project called Pandora for Artists. We hope to have it live at South by Southwest this year, and we're doing exactly what you just talked about. We're going to be creating a portal that allows musicians to create authenticated accounts, so we know that it's the actual musician or artist representative. They'll be able to log on to the service. They'll be able to see how many songs we have of theirs in our repertory. how often each one of those songs played, number of times it's been thumbs up, thumbs down, number of stations started by that artist. We'll also be able to give you heat maps, which will show areas in the country in which your artist over-indexed, under-indexed. The idea is over time to increase the functionality of that so that artists can communicate more directly. You know, one of the ultimate ironies, I think, from Pandora's perspective, and I've only been with the company a year, is Tim Westergren, our founder, is himself a working musician. And I know he takes personally comments that Pandora is in the business, is in a business other than trying to be a good steward of this music ecosystem. And part of the reason it's taken a while to develop this kind of technology is because our royalty load has been 60, 70, 80% of revenue. We had 30 engineers in total, 30 engineers, when we had 15 million monthly listeners. So imagine, you know, that's all these engineers could do was sort of keep the wheels on the bus and keep it going down the highway. Yes, we're being rewarded on Wall Street for the vision of the business, and we're taking the additional resources and plowing them right back into the business to do things like Pandora for Artists. So I do think there are lots of opportunities because of the one-to-one relationship that internet radio services can provide, separate and apart from terrestrial radio, to allow artists to more closely connect with their fans.
And I'll say that, you know, notwithstanding the public policy decision to your question, from when you're in business as an artist and you're looking to make your passion a business, that kind of information is hugely helpful for you. You know, it helps you plot and manage the other parts of your business. So that would add some value to an otherwise seemingly interesting
Just stop with it while I'm back.
Yeah, I have this guy right here. I have this on the webcast.
I think that's fantastic, and I think when you do something like that and you put forward a button that says to an artist, "So would you like to opt in?" They'll click the button. I think that's great. You know,
So you had a really good example, Jeff, earlier of the obfuscation that happens with data and data corruption, and you want to share that example with us on YouTube?
no, because
No?
it's being filmed.
Oh, okay.
No, so but what I will stop. Yeah, no. So so into Pandora's defense on this as well, you need to make sure people get paid, and how do you actually accomplish that, right? And you have to be able to track the uses of either the recording of the song or the lyrics and melody of the song. And so this basically turns into technology meets the music industry, and the challenge is the two tend to talk past each other. If you go to Google, it's just a giant database in many ways that indexes, and if the wrong information gets inputted at the outset, it will choke the flow of money to the right person. For example, and I'll make this up, all right, if you have a song called, I don't know,
Make Me Up.
Yeah, Make Me Out, and you have the composition. So you have all right. Sony Records hired Whitney Houston to record "I Will Always Love You," so I'll do that. Right? You have the recording of the song owned by Sony, but Dolly Parton wrote the lyrics and the melody. So what happens if the song "Start Me Up" accidentally gets stapled? The lyrics and melody, the wrong composition gets stapled to "I Will Always Love You" in a database system. What happens is the money flows to the wrong entity. Right? Instead of going to Dolly Parton, it's going to the Rolling Stones songwriting publishing entity. And that happens constantly. And this is a huge challenge. And I do not, for the life of me, have an answer to how we do this, particularly when the majority of copyright being created today is happening outside of the old system. What do you do when you literally have 500,000 to 1 million newly recorded songs being recorded by a gentleman in the green shirt falling asleep? And I'm totally teasing, I'm sorry. A gentleman in the green shirt who writes it and records it, right? How are we supposed to give him a unique identifier that gets plugged into a global database?
Is that something that, that lawmakers can mandate
That's
or can
actually
facilitate?
that's actually been a discussion.
Yeah.
There's
Registry.
just been a green paper, which is a predecessor to a white paper issued by the Congress.
Does the green paper come out of my wallet?
It came from the Commerce Department, and actually the Patent and Trademark Office and the Commerce Department wrote this. They researched it through the Copyright Office and many other folks, and one of the issues that they proposed was a copyright hub, where all the material would be available as to who owns the rights to particular songs, both the compositions and the sound recording, so that somebody going to license it would know exactly where to go. The United Kingdom has already started a similar copyright hub that's actually launched without that granularity, but is expected to eventually get to that point where people who want to use music, not just for a streaming service, but in an audiovisual presentation, a movie or a TV show, who want to use it in an on-demand service, who want to use it in a commercial, can figure out what the rates would be. And the UK service, as I understand it, and I haven't had a chance to check it out, talks about what rights you need. It's a resource for anybody in the world or anybody in the United Kingdom to come to see what those rights are, and eventually we'll have the ability to transact business on that one copyright hub. And that would be a great opportunity if Jeff ever got his wish, where artists and companies could transact business in one place easily and transparently. The problem is that doesn't exist right now. And, you know,
And how do you enforce it? I can see it working retroactively, but how do you enforce it moving forward? Right? When you literally have 1 million new songs coming from 13-year-olds in their garages, as an example, how do you get them into the database before it gets released?
Well, actually, I think it's easier to do it going forward if everybody knows it's there than it is to catching up with a millions of songs.
It'll require
that don't
people
exist.
to, the way they had to file for copyrights. If you want to be paid, you got to follow the program a little bit. So that part, from a manager's point of view, or even a business person, I think those are the kinds of things that the web does really well, is allow big things, people to come together and transact. And being able to put your songs out there for a now independent band and have them be out there and available, and people will be able to have a conversation point, as opposed to calling up somebody at Sony and hoping they're there, or somebody else is worried about their contracts coming up and, I'll get that freaking Incubus thing later. Those are the things that scare you from the manager's side. And I think if you're an artist out there, out of those millions of artists out there, and you're thinking about doing this for money as opposed to just the passion, and I put my record up on TuneCore, which is part one, but that's no disrespect. That's the easiest part, is putting it up there. All these lines in my face are from trying to make sure that people hear it. I mean, it sounds flip, but it's not. That's the mission. So this discussion here operates at this kind of 60,000-foot level, where the war is going to be won right there in the dirt. And sometimes this conversation flies so high they don't even see where the battle's really being fought. And the battle for musicians out there is standing out from the crowd. And that's why these labels, as much as they have a lot of issues going on, and I've had my rows with them, there's a lot to be said for what it takes to stand out. It requires money, it requires muscle, it requires infrastructure and expertise and all of that. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole different animal than having a discussion about compulsory or whatever.
So
And I'm curious about this, because do you think is that as true today as it was 20 years ago?
And even more so today. And I say that with full conviction, because Brandon Boyd, the singer of Incubus, is putting out a record. He put out a record on his own, what he did with a producer friend of his, Brendan O'Brien. And so we put it out through In Grooves. And not only did the singer have to spend all the money it takes to make the record himself, wrote the checks, then we had to market the record. So then that product manager, head of marketing that was at a label, I'd call up and boss around or talk to the president, have him have a little pep talk with him, right? We've got to hire that person. We have to hire the publicity person. We still have to hire an independent promotion person that are getting questionable backhanders at radio, and all of that stuff. But he is literally paying for everything, including, do we FedEx that or Messenger? The Messenger has been washed right out of our system with Incubus now when they had to pay. We said, Messenger that over, right? So that's the real world of independent music, and that's when somebody actually has a name, that has some success, that has some visibility. So is it still part of the problem? I say even more a part of the problem And the good news is the fairy tale can live a little bit, that some band out there nowhere can connect with people like me through the web because they can get you on the phone or you can answer your emails. That didn't used to happen. Tommy Mottola used to have 3 secretaries, God knows why, to get through them. He didn't do emails. He had his gal print it for him. That was the business I grew up in, and nobody could go up in the elevator. And Sony had 6 elevators, only one couldn't go up when Tommy was going up, right? That was the business I grew up in. So you laugh, but it's true. And so there are ways for you to get your music above the ground here, but even Macklemore and Lewis, who everybody's talking about, they're through a big major distributor. They did a different kind of deal. They own their record, but they're still playing the game the same way we played it. And it costs lots of money, lots of expertise, lots of infrastructure. So yeah, I think it's even tougher today.
Do you think the label structure continues to be relevant? Because
The
label
function,
did that for you.
the function of it is still relevant because all those people that used to work inside Sony are separate phone calls. Now today I'm doing a deal, used to do a deal with Sony, they'd cover the world. Today, we did a deal with In-Grooves, and internationally it's not working out as well, and the deals are much looser that you can get out of things that aren't working as well. So today I'm on the phone talking about a guy doing a deal in Germany, Benelux, here and there, and I'm like, all right, what the freak are we going to do? And the rest of it's my job, as I tell the singer in the band all the time, I said, my job got a lot tougher, and yours got a lot tougher too, because now every creative decision, which is what artists really want to make, is now inexorably tied to a business decision that there's no way of running. You are going to pay for it. It's no different than having your kid figure out that he has to fill up the tank in the Suburban, costs $100. Wow, really? Yeah, I was paying. Now you pay, right? Different guy shows up at the game. So, yeah, it's tougher out there.
I think, well, the competition for eyes and ears is definitely stiffer. 100 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every single minute. That's just beyond my comprehension. So there's a lot of competition for our attention. So one of the
Lots of cats, right?
Cats and dogs, yeah.
One of the so this comes down to discovery and marketing. And one of the products that's come out recently is called the BitTorrent bundle, which I think is kind of an intriguing notion. BitTorrent, we all know, is it's a technology protocol that was invented 14 years ago, Bram Cohen, and it's simply a file transfer protocol. It's just a technology protocol like ICP, TP, or whatever. HTML, it's different, and unfortunately, it's the preferred protocol, file transfer protocol for a lot of pirates. But as a technology, it's simply a technology.
They love it in Somalia.
And but there's also what a lot of people don't know is BitTorrent, the company in San Francisco, hugely profitable, completely lawsuit-free, and completely legal. And it exists to help people take advantage of this very fast, very efficient file sharing protocol. So people like Arcade Fire, Madonna, Moby has distributed their music through the BitTorrent bundle, which makes bundles of content available to about 70 million people who use BitTorrent. And it has gates in it. So if you get a certain amount for free, and there's a little gate if you want to pay, or if you want to take an action like share your email, which has value, or if you want to share, promote it on Facebook or Twitter, which also has a little bit of monetary value. If you take those actions, it opens up the gate and gives you access to even more content. So there are gated thresholds along this. So it's a new kind of way to get your content in front of people. What do you think about that? Is that interesting at all, or is that just a gimmick?
We actually, I've had some conversations with Matt Mason, and I read your article this morning as I was boning up for today. I think in some ways, what's interesting about it is if you buy that, from my perspective, if your artist business is mostly 80% of it showing up and playing a gig, and that the more people hear about you, the more widely distributed your music is and your art, that they're more likely to show up, it could actually be good because it gets the stuff out there. But it's also kind of a concession that the music is free now, right? Which is somewhat problematic, And so it's just, to me, it's another interesting way of getting stuff out there. But they're not selling music on BitTorrent. And like I say, it almost concedes the point 100%. But it is interesting how you can get stuff out there. For example, Brandon Boyd could put a song or two or an acoustic track or two in a bundle. He could put, some pages from a book in the bundle. He could put bits and pieces of his digital stuff out there. But the reason we didn't do it this past time around is because I couldn't quite figure out what the end game was. Okay, if we give away the book, now they don't have to buy the book. If we give away the music, now they don't have to buy the music. And so I wasn't totally comfortable, but I definitely buy that you can reach a lot of people really fast, and it's just another interesting way to promote if you take out and concede you're not going to make any money selling the music.
To me,
which is a bit of a drag, to be honest.
It is a gimmick, but it's and there's nothing wrong with a gimmick. But I support any artist that wants to opt in for it at their discretion. I completely support you. That's your music. Do what you want. I think you have that right and should have that right. What I think drives the revenue is consumer behavior. Money always follows the behavior of the consumer. So when we all bought music on vinyl, guess where the money was? In vinyl manufacturing. And then when we moved to CDs, it moved towards CD manufacturing plants and people that own the patent licensing technology to CD technology, which was Sony and Philips. And I think Sony ended up owning it. Every single time a blank CD was manufactured, the entity that owned the patent for that got paid. And then you move to downloads, MP3, the Fraunhofer Institute, or whoever owns that got paid for every download. And now we're moving into streams. And so the money will always follow the behavior pattern of the consumer. I think Rennie's right, and even Pandora's right. They work hard to go where the consumer is. And ultimately, it's about convenience. I mean, look at cassettes. Cassettes, for those of you that aren't aware of what they are, which he made mixtapes of. If you look at a cassette versus a vinyl, I mean, cassettes are this big, and they sound like ass. I mean, there's no other way to say it. They don't sound good, okay? Compared to vinyl, they just don't sound good. Even with Dolby, then you just squish the mid-range and the top range, and it's just very flat. And yet cassettes went from 2% of the market to 48% of the market in regards to music sales within a year, basically, of the advent of the Walkman. Why? Because we as consumers love the idea of our music being portable for the first time. And there was a time where you couldn't make a phone call on the device that plays your music. So I would walk to 8th grade or whatever it was with my Walkman. And so again, you can have lower fidelity, you can have crappier sound quality, you can have a device that runs on batteries, but if the consumer adopts it, so if the world adopts BitTorrenting, they're set. But the challenge is they don't have a hardware device. They're not going to be in the car. They're not going to be tied into the refrigerator the way Microsoft is trying to be in the Android operating platform. These are companies that are verticals going from the bottom up with operating systems to hardware to software, which consumers are adopting. And that's the food chain. I mean, iTunes has me hooked. Everything I do is I'm so tied into Apple now. My movies, my music, my books, my iPad, my computer, my iPhone, all of my media is tied into this one company. That's it. I'm not going anywhere, or I lose all my media. So that's basically, my thought about BitTorrent. Cool, gimmicky, artist should opt in, but
Or you can be a Luddite like me who has one of the 3 new Blackberries that was sold in the...
That was you. That's
Exactly, and that doesn't give you Google Maps, so you get lost coming over here from the hotel.
I got news for you. Even with Google Maps, you get lost.
Okay. But you're free of the iTunes universe. Although I do have my old iPod from
He has a
10
covered
years ago.
wagon waiting out there.
But, I think your service is indicative of the fact that everybody is trying to figure out how to make money in the digital distribution world. Advertising, with the royalties as they are, much less with any changes in the royalties, is very difficult to make it as a business for distribution, unless you're tied into some other platform where you're making your money off of the hardware or by selling it on Amazon or whatever. So people are looking for some other way, and one of the ways is by not only selling advertising but gathering data and using that data for whatever other purposes, which leads you into a whole different public policy debate that you'll probably do a seminar on in the spring on privacy issues. Because the more data you get from more people, that ties into their Facebook account and ties into their Twitter feed and their emails, suddenly you've got all sorts of privacy issues that arise. So it's one more thing.
Do you think filmmakers should have to be forced to have to license their content to streaming movie services?
You know, I think it's a different question because, you know, a film, you're talking about a limited number of films, and you don't necessarily need the whole world of films in order to provide a film service. In the music world, I think it's much more important to be able to provide to consumers the music that's out there. And I think the compulsory license makes it much easier for music services of all sizes and shapes to provide what consumers want, and that's access to all the music that's out there.
So we value them
EMI
so
had
much.
a really interesting model before it got swallowed up in the merger, which was sort of a sandbox licensing scheme. Any startup not making any money can go in and play with their set of rights for free, create products, and they don't have to start paying until they start monetizing the product. But I guess you don't like this program.
No, I've had lots of debates with rights holders for small webcasters that you ought to give breaks to small webcasters to get better royalties so that they can innovate and eventually pay more. And the answer is always, if you're not monetizing, then you're not paying the artists. So you have to be paying something. We can't just give you the rights for free because you're taking it away from somebody who's going to pay the royalties that are set.
Is it taking away, or is it just not adding to it? They're not taking anything away from it.
I mean, some of the arguments that I've had is that you're taking it away. If these innovators disappeared, then somebody who's paying the full freight royalties would get all that audience.
See, I love the idea of having a company, and this is what I try to create and what I'm working on again, where the artist can come, I don't care who you are, and I'll have done the deals. I'll have done the hard work with the Pandoras and the Spotifys and the Rhapsodies and the iTunes and the Deezers and the Symphonies and and you can log in and you can just cherry pick this, and this. And you're like, what's this? You get a click and you get a description of what it is, and it discloses the royalty rates and provides simple direct licensing of both master and composition, a one-to-one pipeline. There's no governmental intervention. There's no compulsory licenses. There's no statutory rates. It's the market driving the demand based on innovation for the consumer and the artist. And I'll create that middle tier. And to me, that's not a radical idea. That sounds like a really good idea. And it'll take some work and time and some venture capital, but I think it'll be hugely profitable and it'll clean up the mess. And it'll get the right people paid. And that's what I'm really into. I'm really into that concept. Guess what I'm not into? I love that idea, and it can work, and I got to build a good chunk of it before the departure with TuneCore, and I look forward to doing it again.
So we've got 20 minutes left. I'm going to start opening the floor up to questions. If anybody has a question, we have a mic here. It's a corded mic, right? So we have to come up here to ask a question. But we're slowly unwinding it so you don't have to stand in the corner.
Hey, I want to ask a question to take in a little bit different direction. I'm Marty Brennan. I'm a copyright and licensing librarian here on campus. I teach all different kinds of people about copyright. I'm teaching a class next week called Copyright for Creators, where they have to, where I explain, what the limits of fair use and what they can use in their materials and how to protect their own copyright as they're making their first pieces of original content and putting it out there. This whole idea of compulsory licenses makes me worry about fair use. If I'm an average producer who's about to put something up on YouTube, if there is a system of compulsory licensing, then I have to license everything, right? I mean, that's going to be my immediate thought. I know fair use will continue to exist, believe me. I'm just saying this seems to eat into it. And what do you guys say about fair use? I mean, we're really talking all today about the business side and putting things out into a marketplace. But what about the average user who's not looking for profit but wants to grab a piece of Incubus music, put together a fun YouTube video and throw it up on YouTube? In a world of compulsory licensing, am I ever going to be able to do that realistically when you guys have an army of lawyers and I have just me?
Actually, I think that a compulsory licensing scheme or a scheme that makes it easy to license music for particular uses eliminates some of the problems and some of the risks that you're taking with fair use. Fair use doesn't go away with a compulsory license. The problem with fair use is that there is no hard and fast rules as to exactly when a use is fair and doesn't have to be compensated. So anytime a creator is taking music and using it in a video of any sort and claiming fair use, it's a bit of a crapshoot whether what they're doing is really fair or not. If they could pay a reasonable rate that was easily determinable to use a piece of music in their video, then they eliminate that crapshoot and eliminate some of the lawyer's fees involved.
This gets into the audience thing here, and this is again where, as a manager, we don't spend our time on all these things. It's a much lower level, but it brought up an interesting thing. Jeff and his new company, Audience, who Incubus and now Brandon Boyder signed up, is this idea that on YouTube in particular, kids were putting together their own videos, their own things forever. They weren't calling up. Actually, some Incubus fans would call up and ask my permission, and I would always kind of go out to do your thing here, because people were out there doing it. And so where Audium came into the mix here, and was they came up with a system that allowed the band to get paid for the underlying composition of the song here, right? So that if some kid's out there doing a love letter to his girlfriend, he wants to play Driver, they want to play it at their wedding, and it's in their wedding video, that we actually can get covered on it. I was having a conversation with the singer of the band going, hey, so next time we're playing in Brazil in December, you hold up that microphone and say, all you people, put your iPhones in the air, and I want to see how this looks from your perspective. I said, if they all did it and they recorded the song, Brandon, you would actually get paid for it. Now, you couldn't approve but you get paid for it, right? So much of this stuff's going on anyway. Sometimes I think when you actually call up the person of authority, you're actually held to a much higher standard than everybody else is. So, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's so profitable. It's so profitable that artists are encouraging their fans to make covers of their songs or videos and upload themselves so that they can start monetizing the advertising that gets on those covers.
It's a second income stream. The first income stream comes from either when you get the music or listen to it, and the second income stream comes from when you use it, right? And that's what we do as music fans now. We get the music and then we use it. We're not supposed to use it, and the RIAA comes and sues us, but now we can use it. And so with YouTube, I realize with the fair use question, it's much broader than just YouTube, but with YouTube in particular, anybody basically can do anything and upload it to YouTube because it's YouTube doing the reproduction, not the individual. So the onus is on them, not on the person that uploaded it, although there is a contract between that person and YouTube. But what I love about it is, go ahead and take your favorite YouTube song, go ahead and take your favorite Michael Jackson song or your Incubus song, put it in your YouTube video and upload it. And then what's happening on the flip side is all that's going to happen is there'll be a little ad on it. No one's saying you can't use it. There's just going to be an ad before the video. No big deal. Right, and so it was cool when Steve has a show, the Steve Rennie show, and this is kind of where we got to meet. I don't know why you've chosen to do this, but it's awesome.
I think about that frequently.
Part of his home has basically a television studio in it, and he brings in guests far more important than I to sit.
Not as lively, though, I'll tell you that.
I get paid by the library, and so I've learned a lot watching his show. And by the way, it's worth you guys checking. What is the name of it?
It's called Renman Live.
Right. So
my website is www.renman, which is my nickname, mbformusicbusiness.com.
So we're sitting there talking about this, and it's a wonderful idea. If you can get 100 million people to cover a Brandon Boyd song or record him performing live or take an Incubus master or composition and put in their YouTube videos, God bless them, because the consumer just has to make the piece of mashup culture, right? And then that goes into YouTube. YouTube has done the hard work in doing the licensing deals, and the advertiser is supporting that, and artists can opt in for this if they like, and they do have an alternative. They can get pissy and tell YouTube to take it down through a DMCA notification. But it's a fascinating question, and I love the idea of empowering the population to create these mashups and then monetizing it a second time.
And I'll give you a little twist here, not to get too far, how it changes the artist mentality on it. Because when you're working for a label, you're not connected to any of this stuff, right? When I had the conversation or became aware that in easy arithmetic, drop 3 zeros on those views and then multiply it times $3-4, and there's what that video is generating. For years, Brandon had a problem with ads. We never ran ads on our Incubus stuff. As soon as he had to pay for the video himself, right? And then it was like, so if this thing comes out, then we would actually get that money, could actually pay for the video. I go, yeah, objection over, right? And I said that not to be trivial, because I used to say, Brandon, were you getting a better seat in heaven over this? I said, Christ, everybody's running videos. They all got ads on them. Nobody's paying attention. You're clicking bail after 5 seconds.
Well, not only that, commercial radio
Change the attitude.
Commercial radio or a Pandora service, the artist doesn't get to pick and choose for the most part the ads. If their song is licensed into a movie and airs on television and there's a Budweiser commercial, they don't get to say over that. It's the same concept.
I just take a minute to ask. Oh, I'm so sorry. Never mind.
Oh, we're babbling and you're there. I'm sorry.
A lot of the conversation today has emphasized that companies like Pandora are maybe exploiting artists and profiteering and taking advantage of the content to make money for themselves. But I'm struck by a number of different trends. And companies like Rhapsody have recently announced layoffs. I recently discovered another service called Mog, which is another competitor in this space. And it seems to me that this whole digital distribution platform sort of segment of the value chain here is just getting massively commoditized very rapidly. And you're painting Pandora as if they're the guys making all the money here, but I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know how Pandora's going to make any money going ahead. It seems like that's an intensely competitive part of the value chain. And that seems to speak well for artists and the content owners to be able to capture more of the value for themselves. And we have a similar trend that seems going on in video, where there's been a lot of talk about how Netflix is, it's not really a distribution platform anymore. They're themselves becoming a content player themselves. And so everybody's excited about the value of content these days and seemingly much less excited about the value of being in a digital distribution platform. Seems completely at odds, I feel like, with a lot of the conversation so far today. Just wanted to sort of get your reactions to that.
Well, I guess I didn't do a very good job of saying exactly that the distribution services are very difficult places to be, because how they pay for the music and stay in business is a tough issue. In many ways, the content guys at least are getting something.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, and one of the ways I think we would differentiate Pandora from Netflix and from Spotify, is in many ways those are services where it's the grocery store, right? We're going to put up on the shelf 7,000 different kinds of cereal, and you're going to take your cart and walk down the aisle and pick whatever brand of cereal happens to catch your eye, or the brand of cereal that you know. We actually take a different approach, which is we analyze every song individually. A musicologist listens to it and tries to characterize it across a bunch of different dimensions. And then we have algorithms that sit on top of that, with the idea being that when you walk into the store and say, I like Cheerios, we're actually going to push a cart up to you that's got strawberries and milk and bananas and other things that we think would be, that you would enjoy, it's sort of based on your initial preference. So there is definitely a commoditization that occurs if what your platform is doing is essentially providing an a la carte where folks can come in and pick what they want off the shelves. There's a value add, I think, that we provide through personalization that is more difficult to commoditize, simply because of the amount of effort that goes into actually analyzing the music and organizing it intelligently.
Well, let's be clear, that conversation was from the perspective of the digital music service, who you have a passion for, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have one. On the flip side, and frankly, it's not my problem if Pandora survives. 98% of artists that were released by major record labels failed. Most artists fail, right? What about their overhead? What about their guitar strings and travel and all their stuff? They put money into it. No one's supporting that. So to me, it's like, you choose your business line. Some will succeed and some will fail. And frankly, it's not up to the artist to have to prop up a company. Now, that being said, we've had an IPO of Pandora that's trading pretty high in the market now, and the original investors have made lots of money off of it on the backs of the copyright creators, who made zero off of the IPO. So the original investors into that company have done quite well, despite that company losing money. Just like Spotify, they're losing money, and they're trying to raise another $100 million, and their valuation is up to over $1 billion, despite them losing money. And this is what I'm worried about.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk today about the fast approaching future when all recorded music will be available through these subscription streaming services. But realistically, it's never going to be all recorded music. There's going to be a large amount of content, historical content in particular, that's not available because it's not commercially viable, because orphan works is a really huge volume to it, things that can't be licensed because there's nobody to pay royalties to. And this has traditionally been the province of research libraries and archives. We provide a public service by collecting, preserving, and making this material available long after its commercial viability has come and gone. And I'd like to know what you think what's the future place of libraries and archives in this streaming only, all music available future?
I'm just thinking. I don't know.
Theoretically, with a statutory license, all music could be available through a service operating under the statutory license. I don't want to put you out of business, but I mean that could theoretically be there, an opportunity with a compulsory license to have everything available.
You know, it's an interesting question. I have a friend who lives in Berkeley, and she gets books out of the library via download. And it's, proprietary tech that allows her to gain access to the media, which then expires and she has to go and return it. So perhaps part of the answer is you'll be able to provide the media in a way that it isn't provided by other entities, provided you have this sort of unique technology that times it out and so forth. Because, outside of that, you're right, everything isn't going to be available because there's more stuff being created as we sit here. But for the most part, it's going to be a good chunk of it. The Orphans works, that's a nightmare. I don't even know how to begin to address that.
But those are the things that can be addressed because at least physical copies can be collected by libraries and archives under the provisions of current copyright law that allow us, doctrine of fair sale and so on, that allow us to both collect those and allow people access to it without having to license them.
That's true. And what do you do when the majority of music is being released in a non-physical format? Rhetorical question.
I'd like to know too.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank our moderator and our panelists for a terrific. In closing, I just want to also thank three people who organized this: Susan Woodward, Christian Zarate, and Colleen Callahan, and as well the director of the Luskin Center, Professor J.R. DeShaza, who very importantly okayed the financial support for today and the other events. So thank you to all of them as well. Our next panel is on November 5th, and we hope to see you. Thank you.
That's the current.